All right, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here in Vegas for Cloud Next 24 on this first day of Cloud Next. We are here today to talk about identity and access management, and specifically all that's new with identity and access management, from least privilege to custom guardrails and AI-powered assistance. My name is Abhishek Hemrajani. I head Cloud IAM from a product management point of view and open source security. I have a pretty packed agenda for you for the next 45 minutes. I'm going to announce a ton of new stuff that we are announcing at Next this week. And I also have quite a few demos throughout my session. What I'll also try to do is leave maybe like 5 to 10 minutes towards the end for Q&A. But then I'm happy to stick around, meet you over your favorite beverage to talk more and keep the conversation going. I also have my team here in the front, and they can answer some questions as well. So with that, let's scan through the agenda, and we'll get started. The first thing I want to do is introduce you or reintroduce you to Google Cloud's IAM. We like to think of it as full-stack identity and access management. We'll then start talking about how important it is to have the choice of your identity provider with the work that we're doing with Workforce Identity Federation. We'll then start talking about the defense in depth when it comes to access management and a brand new control that we're announcing this week called Principal Access Boundary. We'll then talk about new capabilities that are coming into IAM, privileged access management and cloud infra entitlement management, or CIEM, also pronounced KIM, K-I-M. That hits preview this month. We'll then talk about custom guardrails or custom org policy, leading into the work that we're doing with Gemini Cloud Assist, and then we'll recap everything and take questions. With that, let's quickly get started. Now, when we think about our investments in identity and access management, they are centered around a mission. And our mission is to enable identity-first, AI/ML-powered, policy-based security for you, your users, your infra, your data, and your applications. So the emphasis is on identity-first, AI/ML-powered, and policy-based security. And you'll see that throughout this session and how we make investments in identity and access management. But before I talk you through those investments, a quick recap on what does Google Cloud IAM actually look like with everything that we've built. It starts with our very comprehensive and robust identity platform. So if you're using Google Cloud, you have the option of using Cloud Identity. You can also federate your existing identity providers with Google Cloud using our Workforce Identity Federation capability. You can use workload identity for your machine accounts. You also have comprehensive features for certificate management and customer identity and access management for your custom apps. That gives you the all-up identity platform. Now, once you've built this comprehensive identity platform, that allows you to layer policy-based control on top of identity, allowing you to have features around admin time authorization, such as identity governance and administration, and entitlement management, which is a very important piece that we should all be worried about as IAM practitioners. And also runtime authorization capabilities like IAM, the new privileged access management capability, account takeover prevention capabilities, MPA capabilities, and our upcoming features around fine-grained access control. Now, once you've invested in that robust identity platform and that policy layer, then IAM can enable the business with a variety of security and app-centric scenarios, like ITDR, Identity Threat Detection and Response, fraud prevention, or runtime application risk protection. So if there's any slide that you want to take a photograph of during my session, this is going to be it. So pull up your phones, take a picture. Awesome. All right, let's talk about identity. We want you to bring your own identity when you come to Google Cloud. Identity provider should be a choice that you make, and you should have absolute freedom. So when you onboard to Google Cloud, you have the option of using Google Cloud Identity. Google Cloud Identity allows you to synchronize your existing identities over to Cloud Identity and get started with Google Cloud. You can also use Identity Federation. And what Identity Federation allows you to do is, without having to synchronize your existing identities, you can use Workforce Identity Federation and get started with Google Cloud. But what we're seeing customers do is operate in a mixed mode, where they synchronize their identities with Google Cloud Identity, but for targeted scenarios. Maybe they want to onboard an extended workforce, or they just acquired a new company. That's where the mixed mode of using cloud identity and workforce identity federation becomes a very robust choice for a lot of our customers. So the scenarios that are best suited for when you could consider workforce identity federation, when you want a consistent SSO experience across all of your applications, and Google Cloud is one of your many applications, you could simply use workforce identity federation. When you want to onboard a new entity or an extended workforce, as I just mentioned, great option to use workforce identity federation. Maybe you already have cloud identity for your primary Google Cloud development environment, and then you've just acquired a new company, and they use Okta. So instead of making a decision on how are you going to deprecate Okta, move over to the primary IDP, then get those newly acquired members onto the Google Cloud platform, for that targeted employee set, you could use workforce identity federation, allowing them to use your Google Cloud environment without making an IDP decision right then. Also, great way to avoid any additional compliance work. So if you're using your own IDP, not synchronizing it with us, you don't add one more component to your regulatory requirements. You simply do the audit work using your existing IDP that you may already be doing for your other environments or your other cloud environments. So the whole notion is around flexibility and choice, and we want to just make it easy for you to onboard and get started with Google Cloud. So I'm super excited to announce that Workforce Identity Federation is now generally available for over 120 Google Cloud products. If you've been watching the progress on this capability, you would have noticed we started last year with maybe like 20 products that supported this. We are now at over 120, which is pretty much every single Google Cloud product now supports Workforce Identity Federation. What's also now generally available is the Cloud Console user experience to configure Workforce Identity Federation is now generally available. Also generally available are targeted scenarios. For example, if you use Microsoft Power BI and you want your users to be able to SSO onto Google BigQuery using their Entra ID, which they use for Power BI, you can now do that with Workforce Identity Federation. Similarly, if you have web apps running on Compute Engine or GKE or App Engine, which you use our identity-aware proxy capability, you can now authenticate those applications also with Workforce Identity Federation. So 120 plus products now supported in all three configurations, cloud identity only, BYOID only, or the mixed mode, which we believe is a far more robust choice for large customers. All right, with that, let's start talking about core access management. Now, when you think about access management, you need to start thinking about how do you enable defense in depth for your access management systems. At the base of all of it is your IAM policies. IAM policies or IAM grant, which basically allows a principal targeted permissions on targeted resources. So for example, I, as Abhishek, should be able to create a virtual machine in a specific project that I have control over. That's your basic core IAM allow policy. Last year, we announced the GA of IAM deny. And what deny rules allow you to do is that you can prevent certain members, or maybe all members, from carrying out specific permissions or specific actions on specific resources. So what allow gives, deny takes away. But it's a great control to ensure that even if you have accidentally provided grants, the permissions that you don't want users to have, you can ensure that there is a deny policy which gets computed as the most important policy. Today, we are announcing a new kind of policy, and this one's called Principal Access Boundary. And what Principal Access Boundary does, it restricts the resources that your principals are allowed to act on. So think of Principal Access Boundary as a perimeter between which your access management should actually work. And we'll talk about the exact detail of it. So principal-centric policies that restrict member access to targeted resources, these can work at an org level, a folder level, or a project level. The one thing to note is that these policies do not grant access. They simply define the extent or the scope of access that your user should have. Let's talk about a few scenarios, and it's going to become clear how this actually works. So for example, you may have an organization, and you want to ensure that every single member, human or machine, can only act on resources in this organization. So even if they have been invited to collaborate on a different org or they have permissions on a different org, you don't want them to be dealing with resources of a different org because that could be a phishing risk, it could be an exfiltration risk, it could be an insider threat. You can draw a principal boundary across the entire organization, and you can ensure and set a policy which says all human and machine identities can only operate on resources that are within this organization boundary. You could also have a scenario where you set this at a folder level. So how many of you have service accounts that ideally should only be talking to pre-production but accidentally also talk to production environments because the diligence is not really happening? Yeah, I see a few hands and nods. Nobody's like wanting to raise their hand because it's an awkward thing to have. But a great way to prevent that from happening, what you can do is you can segregate your environments, a folder for pre-prod, a folder for prod, or whichever hierarchy works for you. And then you can set rules which say that humans and machines that are pre-prod can only talk to folder that is a pre-prod folder. That way, even accidentally, a service account that's not supposed to talk to a production resource does not end up talking to a production resource. So those are two great use cases to think about it. But because we've built it with flexibility, you could also onboard a vendor and restrict the playground that they have access to by saying, here are the projects that you get access to. So even if somebody accidentally gives you an allow, you're never going to be able to get past the resource boundary. Also important, none of this needs an egress proxy infrastructure. This is completely built into the platform, works in congruence with identity and access management policies. You don't need to set up anything. With that, let's actually look at it on a demo. So for example, I'm going to start off by creating scenario 1, where I want to create a boundary around my entire organization. So in the next few weeks, you'll start seeing principal access boundary in IAM. You can start off by creating a policy. So in this case, I'm going to create a policy for organization boundary. I'm going to start off by saying that I want to limit the scope of principals to only the organization that they are a part of. So I'm pulling my entire organization into the boundary. I can then give this policy a name. I'm going to call it org boundary. It takes a few seconds for the policy to get created. And as soon as the policy is created, you can then start creating bindings. A binding is what takes a principal set and attaches it to the boundary that you just created. So I'm going to add a binding. I'm going to give it a name, org binding. And then I'm going to say, I have various options of picking my principal set. I'm going to pick organization ID. So every principal that's created in this org ID can only talk to this organization. So that ensures that everybody and their activity stays within the boundary of that particular org. A second example is, let's say you want to do this at a project level. So I'm going to start off by creating one more policy. This time, I want to restrict the members to a specific project. So I have a project called PAB control project, Principal Access Boundary Control Project. I'm going to select that as my resource boundary, and I'm going to create the policy. As soon as the policy gets created, I'm going to add a binding to this policy. And this time, instead of picking the organization ID, I can pick the project where my service accounts are created. That way, my service accounts will only be able to talk to resources in that PAB-controlled boundary or PAB-controlled project. So I'm giving this binding a name. I'm calling it project binding. I'm saying the scope that I want is based on a project. I pick the project where my service accounts are hosted, and that's it. Now, once I have this policy and binding in place, IAM automatically takes care of the fact that these humans or machines, what is the extent of access that they have. So it doesn't matter what access they came with, PAB will layer a defense on top of the boundary. And as I mentioned, you don't need any kind of egress proxy infrastructure to make this happen. So think of how we've started building the defense layers. Your allow at the core of it, deny to prevent any actions that users shouldn't have, PAB to draw a boundary around where they are operating. But that's not enough. How many of you worry about privilege management within your organizations? This time, raise of hands. OK, quite a few. And as you'd notice that in the cloud world, PAM capabilities are still pretty fragmented, right? Like, I mean, you still are having to use legacy tools. Some customers tend to create their own policies. They check them in, they check them out, they try to use conditional access, time-bound access. There's like a variety of ways to hack privilege management, but none that's very clean, and it adds a lot of toil. And that exactly is the problem. That problem results in this data from Gartner, which is representative across cloud, which says that 95% identities only use 3% of the entitlements that they are granted. So if this room were a data set, it's a large enough room with quite a few people, maybe like 500 people in this room. If we were to all go back and see how many permissions we have, very likely we use only 3 to 5% of those permissions on an ongoing basis. I know we all want access to that dashboard that we think we're going to pull a report out of, but we never pull a report out of, right? And that access stays. Now, why is that a problem? In the normal course of things, it's not a problem. But the reality is identity is security threat vector number 1. And when you think about your account, during good intent, there's no problem. But if your account gets taken over or is compromised, that attacker now has access to not just those 3% entitlements, they have access to all the entitlements that they can start using to bring about massive destruction in your environment. But at the same time, identity governance and administration is tough. There's a lot of toil when it comes to identity governance on an ongoing basis. But there is also an identity threat. So most customers do a toil versus threat trade-off and pick a happy median where they are okay to accept a certain amount of risk. Well, we want to minimize that risk. And one way to minimize that risk is a new privilege access manager capability, which is now going preview in Google Cloud. Privilege access manager will allow you to create an entitlement at any scope. Entitlements also support IAM conditions. You'll have support for self-evaluation or approval-based workflows, and also included is notifications, justifications, audit logs, etc. So this is what an entitlement looks like. So instead of giving me the permission to be the compute admin, you can actually create an entitlement, which basically says, if you were granted this entitlement for a certain amount of time, based on a certain approver approving it, based on a certain justification provided by you, you can be a compute admin, and IAM will honor that. And when that time window has elapsed, IAM will also revoke that access. So the way to get the access is to request a grant, and the grant gets released once the conditions of the grant have been met. So our privileged access management capability is just-in-time, conditional, and self-approval or approval-based. Let's actually look at this in action. So in the coming weeks, in your cloud geos, you'll start seeing a new capability called PAM, Privileged Access Manager, right under IAM. The way things are going to work is, if you want to create a new entitlement, you can start off by saying, create entitlement. And what I'm going to do with this is, I'm going to create an entitlement that gives everybody in my team the compute admin permission if I were to approve it. So I want them to have compute admin. I'm going to add an IAM condition. I can use a variety of ways to add conditions, including tags. In this case, I'm saying you can be one only on a Saturday. So day of week, Saturday, you can request this entitlement. I get to specify how long you can hold this grant. So I'm going to set it at 4 hours. Then I'm going to say the requesters who are eligible for this entitlement. In this case, I'm going to set it to my team. The approval, I'm going to set for myself. I'm going to mandate a justification when approving the request. And I should be able to click next and done. And what you'll see is, very quickly, a new entitlement is going to get created in my PAM experience. Now, once an entitlement actually gets created, that's the first one that's showing up on the screen now. Once an entitlement is created, anybody who's eligible to receive that entitlement will automatically start seeing it in my entitlements, and then they can go and request it. And also, because we included descriptions, they know how to map which one gives them what. In this case, I'm requesting a grant that I created for myself. If I want to become a compute admin as a break glass without anybody's approval, I can do so. But this one allows me to get it only for 2 hours. So I'm requesting one for myself for 30 minutes. I'm providing a justification, and that's it. I get the permission. So instead of giving me compute admin on an ongoing basis, create the entitlement, make me request it, make me provide the justification, make somebody approve it, let the system automatically revoke it, and that way you're not sitting with permissions that you don't need to sit with. And that's Privileged Access Manager, hitting preview, available natively in IAM for Google Cloud. All right, that's an additional layer of defense. We started with the allow policies. We layered the deny policies. We had the access boundary. We started doing privilege management. Things are starting to get good, but things are still painful. The reality is you still have a lot of access that you're sitting with that you now need to go do bookkeeping on, and it's painful. I routinely hear from customers that entitlement management is a painful problem. Attestation every quarter is a painful problem. And that's where entitlement management or Cloud Infra Entitlement Management, CIEM or CIEM, comes into play. Now, you may have used IAM Recommender from Google Cloud. IAM Recommender is a great way to look at permissions at a targeted window, say 90 days, and it gives you a report which says, these are the users who never use these permissions, or these are the roles that seem too generous. So you can start right-sizing them or start taking away the permissions. But because IAM Recommender does not want to accidentally take away permission, we right-size them with our ML models and tell you the optimal set that you should remove. Now, this works great, but it works for Google Cloud Identity for Google Cloud. Now, I just mentioned that identity provider should be a choice, which means that we recognize that you use all clouds. We also recognize that you use a variety of IDPs. Any controls that we build for the identity systems, we want to do a comprehensive job. So what we are announcing in preview this week is Cloud Infra Entitlement Management that will work comprehensively across your identities and your identity providers, and also on resources across multiple cloud environments, helping you prioritize identity findings that make the most sense for you to look at. You'll be able to discover useful and excessive permissions with GCP and AWS. Azure will come later in this year. You'll get recommendations for optimal roles on all three clouds, not just for Google Cloud. We'll tell you what the role definition should be in AWS and in Azure as well. We'll also help you get on the path of remediation. If we show you 10,000 findings and don't help you solve them, that's not good enough. So we'll help you remediate using Chronicle integration. And we are starting off by supporting GCP Cloud Identity, or when you use Okta or Azure AD Entra with GCP. And with AWS, we'll start off with AWS IAM. We'll follow it up with AWS Identity Center, and then with Azure when you use Entra ID with Azure. All of this is going to become part of our Security Command Center enterprise, because an identity finding in its isolation is a problem. But when you take an identity finding and combine it with a resource finding or a posture finding, let's say you have a mission-critical app that has access that is overly permissive and is an important finding for you to remediate, the combination of those two is far more important for you to remediate. So Security Command Center Enterprise is evolving into a multi-cloud application protection platform with capabilities like posture management, attack path simulation, risk prioritization, case-based workflows using Chronicle, and Cloud Infra Entitlement Management. Let's actually look at how CIEM will show up in the next few weeks. This one's in SCC Command Center Enterprise. So if you're in SCC, the entire experience now starts off with the notion of vulnerability or cases. Cases are prioritized based on severity buckets, and they tell you the most important things that you should be focusing on, not just from an identity point of view, but from an estate point of view. It factors in threats, it factors in posture, it factors in data, and it factors in identity, giving you a comprehensive view of what you're looking at. So once you're in SCC Enterprise, if you scroll towards the bottom, you should be able to see a specific card which says what are your identity and access findings. So in my case, I have 16 findings, again categorized based on security buckets. The first one says that the assumed identity has excessive permissions. It's marked as critical, and I have 6 of those. What I should be able to do is click through them, and you'll see them load up. Notice on the extreme right, these are all AWS IAM findings. So we've onboarded your AWS environment to start pulling insights on what's really happening with how your identities and your roles are configured. And we'll even tell you these roles are overly permissive. Users don't use the permissions that they grant. That's a security vulnerability. You should remediate it. So this is against my CIEM demo next, which is an AWS account. And we don't just stop there. We tell you how to remediate it. And remediation is made possible with the powerful integration with Chronicle SOAR. So notice a case automatically got created, case 98. I pop on the case, loads me into Chronicle. And once I am in Chronicle, I'll get a very detailed playbook of why is this a problem, how should it be remediated, and because Chronicle also integrates with ITSM systems like Jira, a ticket will automatically get created and will get assigned based on the priority of that case. So not all findings are equal. Findings that intersect with other behaviors start becoming toxic combinations, and we prioritize based on toxic combinations and attack paths that can actually be exploited. So that's multi-cloud, cloud infra entitlement management available for GCP and AWS. And by the end of the year, we'll also make Azure available. So if I were to recap from an IAM point of view, allow, PAM, deny, entitlement management, access boundary. So now we have 5 capabilities, 3 of them going preview just this week, that truly start building defense in depth when it comes to access management. All right, let's talk about resource configurations and specifically custom guardrails. Anytime you deploy resources in the cloud, you want to make sure that they meet the mandate that you want them to meet. So with Google Cloud, you already have organization policies. Our organization policies are very comprehensive. You have over 110 organization policies that are built into Google Cloud. These allow you to enforce constraints or resource configurations that must be met at every time of the resources lifecycle. Now, these are great, but we hear from customers that they want the ability to author their own policies or custom org policies, also known as custom constraints, because your CISO wants you to do things a certain way, which may be different from how Google's scanned policy actually wants you to do. So we are now announcing general availability on custom org policy, going generally available for GCS, GCE, GKE, and Dataproc, 4 services. It will dramatically expand to cover all Google Cloud products. On the screen, I have an example of, I want my GKE clusters to be created only if binary authorization is enabled on those clusters. So what I can do is, I can author a custom constraint for enable bin auth. I can ensure that it gets enforced on create. Ideally, it should be enforced on both create and update. Only then should the configuration be allow. And the custom constraint is resource.binaryAuthorizaton.enabled must be true. Only then the GKE cluster or the resource gets created. So this is now generally available. You can create and manage your own policies. These are conditions that must be met during creation or mutation. And because policy intelligence is a very important tool chain that allows you to roll out and test your changes, support for safely rolling out changes available for both org and custom org policy using policy intelligence. All right, let's talk about a favorite topic, AI. So this week, you'll hear us talk quite a bit about Gemini Cloud Assist. And Gemini Cloud Assist is what helps you navigate the Google Cloud platform with your own assistants. Now, it's very logical that in IAM, you want assistance as well. For example, I just showed you IAM recommendations. A very logical question that you could ask me is that, how do I start taking action on the most important IAM recommender findings? Of course, not all 10,000 findings are important. I can't even summarize them. Can you help me get started? The other question that you could ask me when I talk about allow gives you access, deny takes away the access. When your user does not get the access and they go to your IAM practitioner and ask them to tell them why do they not have access, the IAM admin actually has to do a full policy mapping. Yes, you were given access, but the deny came and took away access. How do you help users summarize what is the net effect of the policy that is in action for them? And then take it a step ahead. Why not have a navigator or a companion as you're navigating through important experiences? For example, your service account estate. What kind of risks do your service accounts carry? When were they last used? What resources can they access? How do you disable exposed keys, so on and so forth? So these 3 are our first set of Cloud Assist experiences that are hitting preview and trusted tester. Let's actually see some of these in action. So for example, on this screen, I have IAM recommender summarization, which basically helps me figure out from all the recommendations, summarize the most important recommendations for this project. So you can see that it took every recommendation and brought it down to how many principals and how many service accounts I should be paying attention to. I could then also ask it which service account is able to perform lateral movement, and it hones into the 2 that I should be paying attention to. In the next example, I have a policy troubleshooter summarizer, which basically says my user is not able to get access that they need. What's going on? So I can actually ask Gemini chat, why exactly is my user not seeing the access? And it tells me which specific policy is resulting in the deny effect. And then I can ask the next question, how do I remediate it? What access do I need to provide? And it will give me the playbook of actually making it happen. And then finally, as I'm navigating my service accounts in IAM, I can start looking at insights from Gemini. For example, I can ask Gemini to tell me when was a service account last used, what services does it have access to, what do I do with exposed keys, so on and so forth. And Gemini will give me that experience. So when it comes to all the insights that we give you, all the defense in depth that we give you, and all the experiences that we give you in IAM, you'll see Gemini Cloud Assist as a companion all through those experiences. We are starting off with these 3, and as I mentioned, some of these are hitting preview, and some are hitting trusted tester. So if you're part of trusted tester, you should be able to start experiencing these as well. And we have the team here if you want to talk a little bit more about what Cloud Assist scenarios would make sense for you as you navigate a very complex and evolving IAM landscape. All right, let's quickly recap everything that we saw. But first, let's talk about defense in depth across the stack. So we spoke about access management, grants at the base of it, PAM to control entitlements, deny to make sure that there are no accidents, CIEM to make sure on an ongoing basis you're doing entitlement management, and access boundaries to define the extent or the scope of all of the access. On the resource guardrail side, org policies that come built into the platform, all 110 of those, but then custom org policies which can help you define the constraints that make sense for you and apply them at the granularity that makes sense for you. And then while I didn't cover runtime access risk, our controls like identity-aware proxy, context-aware access, VPC service controls, and org restrictions play a huge role in ensuring that an ongoing runtime point of view, you don't have access risk. And through all of it runs our policy intelligence and upcoming capabilities in Gemini Cloud Assist. So I know I said in the beginning that if there's one slide that you want to take a photo of, it's the full stack IAM. In fact, if there's one slide you want to take a photo of, it's this slide, because this is how we are investing in defense in depth. We are making sure that across the stack, you have multiple controls that layer and work well with each other so that mistakes happen, but there's a control on what can exactly go wrong or not. All right, with that, I'm going to quickly recap everything that we are announcing this week. Workforce Identity Federation, now generally available for 120 plus Google Cloud products. While I didn't talk about managed workload identity for Google Compute Engine is now in preview. We also have a new service account key expiration org policy, which ensures that you can set the time where a service account key is automatically marked for expiry. That org policy is now generally available. Custom org policy for GCE, GKE, GCS, and DataProc is now generally available, and this will dramatically expand coverage this year for all of the Google Cloud products. Policy Analyzer, because you want to analyze policy changes before committing them, is now generally available for custom and org policy. Gemini Cloud Assist for recommender and troubleshooter hitting preview and trusted tester respectively. Privileged Access Manager preview starts rolling out later this month across all Google Cloud geos. Cloud Infra Entitlement Management as part of Security Command Center Enterprise starts rolling out later this month across all service geos. Principal Access Boundary, that's amazing new control to specify the extent of access, rolls out May or June based on how the rollouts happen. VPC-SC Granular Controls is now in preview. And finally, if you've recently created a new Google Cloud org, you would have noticed that those orgs are coming default with a set of organization policies. Those are our policies that we define as secure by default. We believe those organization policies should always be in effect. Of course, we give you the option of disabling them, but those org policies start you off with a secure baseline in your cloud environment. We really want to be the most trusted cloud, and at the same time, we want to make security invisible for you, and Secure by Default allows you to do that. With that, I'm going to throw up a few sessions that I recommend you go and attend this week. I'm going to specifically call out Security 211. This is happening 8 a.m. tomorrow. It's next-gen permissions management on PAM and CIEM. Deepika and Siddharth will give you a very comprehensive deep dive on PAM and CIEM, showing you the product in good detail. I also recommend checking out Security 304, which is happening on the 11th at 9:45 a.m. This talks about preventing data exfil and using all of the Google Cloud controls. So everything from IAP, VPC-SC, org restriction headers that I did not cover in this session, the PMs and the team are going to take you through all of those controls and talk about runtime access risk protection. I appreciate you all being a fantastic audience. Thank you so much. I hope you all will file the feedback. And thank you for being great customers, and good next this week.